Good evening, everyone. Thank you for logging in at tonight's webinar. This is brought to you as part of the Farm Advisory Service and is the final Nutrient Network meeting here at Kirkton, thanks to Scott Campbell and the rest of the Campbell family. I am chairing the meeting tonight, and as many of you know, I'm Ewan Johnston, one of the SAC consultants at the Thainstone office, and in the background I've got one of my colleagues, Malcolm MacDonald, helping me in his role as producer tonight. And our guests, Scott Campbell from Kirkton Farm and Philip Wright from Wright Resolutions. I can see that attendee numbers are rising nicely, and that there's a good number of us now, so thank you all for logging in. We've got quite a packed menu or agenda tonight. If I just click on, so as I said, our speakers tonight are Scott Campbell of Kirkton Farm. He is the Farmers Weekly Arable Farmer of the Year 2019. He's been trying to, within COVID regulations and restrictions, judging this year's contenders. And we've also got Philip Wright from Wright Resolutions Limited, who is, well, an agricultural engineer to trade, but past director of Simba International, and over his career with them has won many awards, as well as since he set up his own company, working with several manufacturers and clients throughout Europe and maybe the wider world. Philip?
Yeah, one or two.
Yep.
One or two.
One or two. So, as I said, the meeting tonight we'll be trying to do within the hour, but I think we've got such a packed agenda, we might maybe be going over the hour, but we'll just see how the questions go towards the end of the evening. For a start, we plan to be looking, doing a crop update over the season. We were videoed some of the crops at Kirkton earlier in the year. We'll then get Scott to give a wee comment on the yield update on his winter barley trial between the King's Barn and the Tower. And just recently, he had a demo of a Dalbo multi-cut roller crimper. So you'll be able to see a little clip of that, comparing it to a Kuhn topper. And then we'll go, leaving the best till last, I'm sure, is Philip Wright on making cultivations work for you, all the way from his home in Lincolnshire. So I hope the weather has been better for you today, Philip, than it has for us. It's been quite wet here and drizzly and damp, but it hopefully has allowed more attendees tonight to join us, and that, so there's nobody maybe combining the night. So, catch up with you, Scott. You have just started harvest, I believe.
Yes, Ewan, yeah, we started a good start. Yes,
Good. Have you managed to get the winter barley and the oilseed rape all completed?
Yeah, winter barley is completed and oilseed rapes completed and all away, and the winter oats are cut, and we're just finishing off drilling oilseed rape, and there was spraying off some spring barley again today, and some spring barley has been sprayed off for a week, so we're about 4 or 5 days away for the start of the next busy spell.
Oh well,
so yeah,
this is
start.
Good. Well, with it being such a packed evening, we'll probably maybe just as well to get the little video of our tour around the farm at Kirkton earlier in the year underway. Welcome to Kirkton Farm for the Soil Nutrient Network. This is just a wee field visit we're doing during the growing season. Today is the 4th of June and Scott Campbell and myself are having a wee look around all the crops here so we can show them to you, all the past visitors to the Soil Nutrient Network meeting. Hello Scott, this is a little video for the Soil Nutrient Network. Can you tell us a bit about the spring barley here?
Yeah, the variety we've grown here, Ewan, it's Sassy. It's on contract for Scott grain. It'll go to Bert's malt for low nitrogen malt and barley. So we got sowing this earlier than usual. It was sown about the 18th of March. Really pleased we got sown early to get the roots down and established. It's established extremely well. It was got the base fertiliser with a drill. We went on pre-emergence with the liquid nitrogen, up to 105 kilos a hectare, and then the field was also sprayed pre-emergence with Liberator and Backrow. We went on at T0 to tidy up the weeds and give it trace elements, manganese, copper and zinc. And it's had its T1, it had 0.4 litres of helix and some magnesium. And then you can see here the awns are nearly ready to peep already, so we're planning a T2 maybe next week. This is a crop of Kingsbarn, 6-row new variety. I'm doing a trial this year between Kingsbarn and KWS Tower, just a gross margin trial to see what is best. The hybrids we have grown in the past have been good, the likes of Bazooka, Bamboo in volume, but the problem I have seen is it's been low bushel weight. But this on the recommended list I'm sure is about a 66 kilos a hectolitre, which I'm hoping we get. It's had a full PGR programme, but it's plenty spring of it still, but it's a little bit higher than what I would like, so I hope it keeps on standing. It's had 3 growth regulators, it's had 0.8 litre of adjust at T0, and it's had 0.2 litres of modus at T0 and 0.2 litres of modus at T1, so it is still quite a high crop. And at T2 it also got 0.6 litres of Ipanema as well, so it still has fairly stretched. But no, it's looking good and clean, and we're hoping for a good yield. We're in our field of winter barley here at Kirkton. We've reduced our winter barley acreage quite a lot over the years, reasons being that spring barley for malting was giving it a good run for its money, and our gross margin it was performing better. But however, with the entry of the EEC scheme, we've been putting in grass margins, green manures, which is rising organic matter as well from straw for muck deals. They're just taking winter barley yields back up. So we've got a field here, it's varieties in the same field. We've got the KWS Tower against the Kingsbarn, the new variety from Syngenta. So here we'll be looking at comparison of bushel weights, yield and the amount of straw. Winter barley, the main reasons we grow it, it is a great entry for oilseed rape. If rape was going in after spring barley, it would technically be too late. It's a great chance for neighbours that have spring barley themselves to get straw in good condition, good quality straw for the winter, plenty of straw, and get fields cleared of straw when they've got time, because labour on farm can be short at the busiest times of the year. Both crops are looking quite clean. In this field they've had the same treatments. On the other fields the hybrid has had more growth regulator, but here I was just wanting to have a look at the height difference for a comparison. So on the whole I would say the winter barley's got good potential this year, and we're hoping for good yields. Here we've got another field of Skyscraper winter wheat. In this field we did our own experiment. It was partly for the Soil Nutrient Network group. One half of the field was ploughed at that side, and the other half was done min-till with the use of our own equipment of the Horse Turano cultivator and the Pronto drill, both done on the same day, same seed rate, same fertilisers, and all same fungicides and PGRs. Firstly, we noticed one of the differences in back-end manganese. It was easier travelling with the sprayer on the min-till versus the ploughing was a bit more slimy and greasy. One disadvantage we saw the min-till was some trash being left on the top. The crop was a little bit more patchy, but after the first application of nitrogen in the spring, you'd hardly know the difference. And looking at the moment now, you could hardly tell where the line was. You and I were actually trying to find out where the line was in the field. Why we're in tilling, I would say to save on fixed costs of farm labour at a crucial time of the year and get the wheat in earlier. Secondly, to try and increase organic matter on the farm, keeping the goodness to the top of the soil. And last of all, trying to save soil erosion, a massive problem that people aren't quite aware of. Ploughing fields and hill land, soil nutrients getting washed off, taking your organic matter content down, taking years to increase that organic matter again. So that's what we're trying to do. We've done a range of experiments, normally with rape and wheat, that's getting the right conditions, right machinery, and keeping the field clean is the crucial points. And we'll feed back later on in the year of the results on harvest. Hi Ewan, there's a field of winter wheat to Varieties Skyscraper. It was growing after our green manure. It was looking great. The dry weather has had an effect on this field of some of the lighter bits. So what we did, we took a tissue analysis about growth stage 37, and the results showed us it was low on quite a number of trace elements. It was low on boron, copper, magnesium and potash, which is vital for grain fill. So what we planned to do before the T2, we decided to split the T2 spray and go on immediately with some, I think it was 4 litres a hectare of feeder K, 0.4 litres a hectare of copper and 0.3 litres a hectare of boron. And then the week after we went on with our T2 spray, the new fungicide Rivistar, with some magnesium to try and keep it green. The reason we did that this year, it was so dry, I don't think the nutrients were coming up through the plant. It needs moisture to make that function. So we'll tissue test again before we do the T3 and we'll see what our results are. Here we've got a green manure crop. This is growing as part of the Eeks. So this was sown on the 1st of May. Method of establishment was used by the Tyranno and then in with a horse pronto drill. It's a mix of radish. This year we went for a later flowering radish, a German radish, so it doesn't set seed quite so early and become a weed in the following crop. The rest of the mix was made up of Phacelia, vetch and clover, and we also added in 13 kilos a hectare of our own barley into the mix as well. The benefits of this to the soil is rooting to break up compaction, fix nitrogen and also give a break crop. We've reduced our acreage of oilseed rape due to high cost of growing, and this is ideal entry for winter wheat. Normally the plants would be twice the size, but it's just dust at the roots and the crop is really screaming for rain at the moment. I still think if we get rain, it'll still do its job. At the end of June, it'll be growing well. And the rules are we can mulch it down after the 15th of August and get an early entry to wheat. So really it is a good break crop.
I was just, hopefully everyone that's listening seen the video. It hopefully gave a good overview of the growing crop this year. Just wondering, Scott, how do you feel it's compared so far with previous years?
Yeah, looking on the video there, Ewan, I forgot how backward the green manure was on the 4th of June. When we were out the other day, when it got that rain, it just took off like a rocket. So if I wait for the green manure, I would say it's now above average, but on the 4th of June, I would have said it would have been way below average. So no, it's amazing what that rain has done for the green manure.
Yes, no, looking at it on the 11th there looked to be quite a bulk of green biomass there for cutting down and that. So yeah, just as a wee learning point and seeing what our audience, our type of cultivations our audience do, I was wondering if we could do a little wee poll, and that just so that it helps where speakers understand where audience as regards knowing what type of cultivations they undertake. So if I can get everyone to click on all the appropriate boxes, so just asking what type of cultivations are you using? Are you all plough, min-till, or are you even zero-till? Or are you just dabbling in it and doing a mixture of min-till and ploughing? So So can we get the results now for that? So it's looking very much like plough is king here in the northeast of Scotland, but there's about 22% of the audience are doing some min-till, so that's good to see. And even there must be someone there, or one or two possibly, doing a zero-till, so that's interesting. And that. Just wondering if we do a wee follow-up poll then to that, just to help. What crops are you using min-till on? Can everyone vote accordingly or tick the boxes accordingly and press submit? So that's us collecting responses. I think, has everyone kind of ticked the boxes now? You can tick multiple boxes if you want to. So for our poll, we can see that the vast majority of min-tilling is being done on oilseed rape, and some using min-tilling on their green manures and cover crops, some on winter barley, and a bit less on spring barley. So Philip, there's a good range of people doing min-tilling in the northeast here that are listening to the. So that'll hopefully give you a bit of background. But Scott, you mentioned in the talk that you were doing the gross margins on your winter barley. Do you want to show your screen as regards now having done some of the gross margins?
Yeah, I'll just put this PowerPoint on. So, hi everyone, hope everyone can hear. Thank you, Ewan. I was just going to go over some of the results so far from harvest, following up on the two previous meetings at Kirkton Farm. So just a quick business overview. I'm Scott Campbell, farm at Kirkton Canella with my father and uncle. I've got one full-time member of staff, and we do all the work on the farm ourselves, apart from variable rate line spreading. We've got lots of diversification going on, including a plant hire business. We do grass and crop trials with SRUC, and we've been host farmer for the two previous meetings of the Soil Nutrient Network, plus the webinar tonight. We farm a total of 415 hectares, which we own, and then we rent about 60 hectare-ish for some extra spring barley. And soil types is all sandy loam, and we do a mix of plough and min-till. So I'm going to start with the winter barley. I said I was doing a gross margin. Here's the figures here, if you can all see on your screen, between the King's Barn and the farm saved seed we used for the KWS tower. So in the two experimental fields, the King's Barn yielded 10.45 tonnes a hectare at 15%. The combine was calibrated on the weighbridge. and the Tower did 9.6 tonne a hectare. We had forward sold some grain at £138 a tonne, but I've taken an average of 125. I haven't included straw yet because everyone's getting different prices. There'll be a discussion of that at the end, but that's a byproduct focusing on the grain. So you can see that the King's Barn has just beaten the Tower, but the Tower really did give it a good run for its money. Going back to costings, you can see the main grudge I do have is the King's Barn seed cost. The hectare pack comes out at 110 a hectare versus our own farm saved seed, basing it on £130 a tonne, is 43 a hectare. Chemicals, similar, but the King's Barn, it had a extra SDHI because it was justified, and it had more growth regulator. I've kept lime the same, base fertilizers and potash was the same, but the King's Barn got a little bit more nitrogen, and fixed costs, which include all the work and the grain drying and farm labor and everything. People can argue, but that's what I've counted out. So you can see there's not much difference. It's less than £10 a hectare. What I would say this on the straw is the buyers of the straw like the Tower better. The King's Barn was more brittle and it wouldn't last so well in the cattle. And also both crops were standing. They didn't go flat, but at the time of cutting, the King's Barn was starting to brackle slightly more than the Tower. So really there's not much between them. The scary figure I have got is if yields came back to 8.2 tonne a hectare and the price of feed barley came back to 110, which you could easily do, I'd be breaking even, and that is what so tight is. That's why the winter barley margins are so tight. Moving on to break crops, we've grown oats for the first time since 1986, and it's been a great success. We had a wheat futures contract for it. Wheat futures minus £5 a tonne, and it yielded surprisingly nearly 10 tonnes a hectare. A lot less growing costs than the King's Barn, especially nearly £200 a hectare less, with a lot bigger of an income as well. The gross margin there was £910, so a lot bigger gross margin on the oats. It's also a break crop, but the weak point is you've got to have a contract. It's a limited market. Oilseed rape did not too bad. It was about just above our farm average, 4.3 tonne a hectare. It was all the way yesterday. And we had sclerotinia problems previous years, so we extended the rotation up to 9 years on one field, and it really paid off leaving that extended rotation. It did 4.9 tonne a hectare, and it was also slightly heavier on the bushel weight. It was 67 kilos, and the one that was in rape every 5 years was about 65. So I'm carefully planning rotations for the next year. Forward plans, as I say, I've sprayed off some spring barley. It's looking good and bold, and wheat's coming on as well. The weather the way it is, they both nearly could clash at the same time, so that's why I'm spraying some spring barley off so we can get into it earlier to get a start. Green manure and cover crops, they've done well. I've got an extension on my EEC scheme for green manure for yet another year, so I've still got 2 years of it left. And benefits have seen increased organic matter on the farm and increased acreage of wheat because you can get wheat in after it, and yields are rising as well. Currently on the farm, we've been adding in yet more drainage because we've got time between rape going into wheat, and we're also doing GPS mapping. And the way the malt and barley is at the moment, you know, with the COVID, next year I'm just not wanting too much barley in general, so I'm going to cut back my spring barley, put in some more oats, a bit more potato rentals. Other businesses have got the chance of some rye. I would definitely advise doing some other crops rather than just spring barley. And also, if you're storing spring barley for a bit longer. Make sure your grain dryers are set. Don't overheat it, and get your fans ready to keep it cool, because on farm this year we might need to store it a bit longer than normal. So just be careful with the grain drying and storage. And
Yes,
this
I
is
think
a
that's
soil meeting. I would finish on this slide here. This is a soil analysis test on one of the fields that was in winter oats. And I'll get Philip to do a discussion later about organic matter on the farms, normally about 6 to 7% of an average at Kirkton. But this field here, it's a really loamy, great quality soil. It's 14.9% organic matter. The other field that was 6 to 7% was starting to burn up in winter oats, but this one held the moisture an awful lot better, and it was given a great yield of oats. And personally, I think it's down to the organic matter content. One thing I did miss out, going back to the winter barley, the bushel weight of the King's barn was 64 kilos a hectolitre at 20%, and the Tower was 63.5, so they're both very nearly the same. But as I say, the risk is with feed barley, there's no premiums at all, and just got to watch that ever rising cost.
Yes, yes. Oh, well, that's
yeah, I think that's me just about finished. I know that Philip's got a lot to say, so I'll move on to my last slide.
Good thorough talk.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck with the remainder of the harvest. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions at the end, so thank you, everyone.
Yep, no, that's good. Thank you very much, Scott. That's a good thorough talk that you've done there. Much appreciated. Hopefully it gives everyone a good insight into what's happening at Kirkton. Just as a wee on-go from talking about the green manure this year, Scott, do you want to tell us a little bit of background as to why you got the demo of the crimper roller versus the topper this year?
Yeah, we the first year we had green manure, we topped it down with our spearhead chopper on the back of the tractor, and the main problem we did the whole field. It was a 12-hectare field, and we tramped it because the tractor was the first to hit the plants, and we tramped it, and then when we went to plough it, it just trailed and became a real problem. And then we ended up having to use the catch-off discs twice to break it up before it would plough down. And I was watching videos on YouTube. Obviously the front topper was working, but there was this crimper roller on front of a Fendt tractor with a plough behind, and I liked the look of that. And I spoke to Ravenhill and Dalbo at the spring show, and they came up with a 3-meter crimper roller for the front of the tractor. So we thought we'd best try that and see how it works. So I think Ewan's got a video of it working on Saturday.
So hopefully that gives you a wee taster of what we saw at Scott's farm on Saturday. And yeah, I don't know, what's your thoughts, Scott? How did it all pan out, do you think? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, it
Yep.
it didn't plan out quite as the video on YouTube was. The conclusion was with the mix of the oil radish, it would never have ploughed in. The topper made a fantastic job, and it would plough in. The last clip of the video, we went up to Ian Stills at Strathbrae. He had a mix of clover and buckwheat, and the roller on the buckwheat, it was smashing it, but he had a massive crop as well. If it was a smaller crop, I think it would have ploughed in. But the conclusion from our experiment on Saturday, Ewan, it would definitely be the front topper is the answer for that job. Personally, I think the crimping roller's more of a crimper, not a cutter. I think a lot of organic farms are using it for vetch and rye, for crimping that, and then direct drilling into it with a disc drill. On our system with the Terrano, the Pronto, and the plough, we're not going to manage to cope with it, and it would mean buying yet another implement. But with the front topper, we can do both jobs. It can also cut all our grass margins with the eeks and the greening and other jobs on the farm. And I got some prices from Ravenhill. You know, the Dalbo press roller was coming in at 6,750 plus VAT, and the Kuhn 3-meter front topper was 8,300 plus VAT. So at the moment, I would be buying a front topper for what we need it for, but I wouldn't be ruling out the crimper roller in future for maybe back end cover crops and stuff. I would like to try it again on something else.
Yes. And so I think this is the perfect time to bring Philip in and see what's his thoughts are as to how could we maybe improve the system that Scott was trialing out, Philip.
Yeah, I would go completely with Scott on the crimper roller in front and a disc-based drill on the back of a tractor. So you lay the crop over and the disc drill can just cut through. The stalks are all in line. That seems to be the most successful realistic application for it. Potentially, I think the type of cover has got a lot to do with it, hasn't it? It wants to be a little bit brittle so that it will cut it. But yeah, I can see it rolling in the right on the front of a drill tractor. It's got a good bit of scope. Topping wise, I don't know whether it's as relevant for you, Scott, but if you were thinking that a cover or a crop had got away a bit and it was risking going to seed or getting plenty far enough ahead, plenty of canopy, you could always top it and still leave it growing, which is something that I've seen work quite successfully. So if you've got not all situations, but in some, if you felt it was getting a bit away from you, if you went in with a topper not too low, just get rid of the potential seed heads. The stimulation you give the root to that cover is tremendous, and it really will put some more root vigorously down often. So that can be quite a nice technique from a topping point of view.
Okay, that's maybe food for thought then, Scott. What do you think to that?
Yeah, no, definitely. As the rules are, though, Ewan, it is the date of the 15th of August. We're not allowed to touch the green manure. So that is, I think a lot of people want to do what Philip says to let the clover come up. But as the rules stand, it is the 15th of August, the date. But yeah, I wouldn't rule the crimper roller out for future. But at the moment, I would be putting my money on the front topper.
Yes, yes. Well, as I have nicely brought Philip into the discussion this evening, just prior to we start your presentation, if I do another wee poll, if I can get Malcolm in the background to set up a poll, just to ask and give everyone an indication, help give you an indication of what our audience is made up of. As are you all arable farmers, or have you got grass in the rotation, or are you more a livestock orientated business? So if I can get a few questions answered. So I think that's most folk voted now. So we've got about just under 20% are all arable, Philip, and an equal footing of 41% arable with grass in the rotation, and 41% predominantly livestock orientated with probably some arable cropping. So I hope that helps give you a wee bit of a background as to your audience. Well, as I said in introduction, Philip has a vast amount of experience in cultivations and the technical side, and as regards the engineering and the science behind the engineering. Philip, take it away, please do.
Thank you very much, Ewan, and thanks everyone for tuning in and for allowing me into your houses and homes. It has been equally as wet down here, Ewan. Just a few minutes ago we had another complete downpour, so it's a bit stop-start, but as is life, isn't it, these days? So what I was planning to do for a brief period now is just really build on Scott's drivers for his business. Got some clear, it's always good for a business to have clear drivers and aims and objectives. So I was going to try and build on I've listed them there, and I've no real need to repeat them, because clearly improving establishment, reducing costs, absolute key for all businesses these days. Improving soil health and soil resilience, I think, very important, and looking to control the damage to the soil by what you would call traditional control traffic, just basically trying to keep in known areas, common areas, just manage it well, but also I would tend to call it controlled pressure farming. In other words, adopting good technology tyres and trying to run those at sensibly low pressures. And I want to try and sort of put a few figures as to the potential benefits of doing that. And consider reduced tillage. It's an interesting split you have in terms of people tuned in. So I'll try and put a few perspectives on that and I'm very much, people that know me would know that I am not a religious anything in terms of farming. I think you've got to be flexible. I think there's always a place in a system for a plough, depending on rotations and soil conditions and everything else. And on the context really of Scott's sandy silt loams and sandy loam soils, just considering the capabilities and practicalities of doing less tillage and what that means. Mainly non-calcareous and therefore not quite as probably readily self-structuring as some. Nevertheless, there's a lot of things that's got a tick in the box as far as I'm concerned, and you'll see. So really what I was planning to do was, well, here we go. Yeah, so if we think about Scott's context in terms of soil structure, what that means, a few basics for you really, principles, and then thinking about prevention and cure of soil damage and how that's managed, thinking about really what solves soil structure problems. And my history would probably suggest that I'm going to say that metal does it all, but the reality of the job really is that the thing that solves soil structure problems generally is biology, nature and roots. And sometimes the metal can be a means to an end to help those other elements to really do their job. So I was just going to talk about that and how we can sort of build soil resilience as much as possible as we go forward. So if we think about managing damage, This picture here on the top left is Lincolnshire, North Lincolnshire wildland, but I guess you relate to the topography a bit. That's a field of winter wheat, just coming up to not far from harvest a few years ago actually. And in that sort of looking down into the crop, you can see the tram lines clearly, but every single drill tractor wheeling in that. And that was interesting, and it started to get this. I got the spade out and looked in those drill tractor wheel marks there, and where we hadn't got a wheel mark on the middle picture here, you can see reasonably open porous structure and a good amount of roots down through the profile. Whereas where we've got a wheeling, we've got a much lower visible porosity in the profile and far fewer roots. And he was drilling it it was a tractor, John Deere tractor, Vadestad drill, and the tractor tire pressures were just over 1.5 bar, 1.6 bar, about 23 psi in old money. He previously ploughed and pressed that field. You can actually see some slight diagonal passes where the press had been, where the cultivator and pressing action had taken place. The eradicators on the drill were set deep. He was doing his best to take it out, but we were still getting a visible effect. So based on that, all of those lines are basically going into the header of the combine and yield monitor in such a way that you can never tell that. It won't show up on a yield monitor, but nevertheless, how significant was it? I was asking myself. So I was allowed to go on a few farms, Northamptonshire, the following year for 2 years, and I did took a quadrat with me and took a large number of samples with a quadrat, both in and out of those wheelings, and rubbed the grains out and compared yields. And if you call the yield, whatever it is, to be in the non-wheeled area to be 100%, there was some variability there. Then I started to look at the relative yield in those wheeled areas. The range of practices adopted, I looked at range from 0-till to similar system to basically to Scott's as a min-till, non-inversion tillage, in other words. And there were a few that had been ploughed. And I was measuring relative yield differences. If you say untrafficked has been 100%, then it was dropping by about 15% on average in those drill tractor wheelings in that year. And where the roller combined with the drill tractor, depending on the width of the roller, that dropped it by anywhere from 6 to 10% more than that. And there was one field I remember particularly had been ploughed wet, ploughed quite late, drilled in a damp condition. They couldn't roll it afterwards, and we lost nearly 40% of the yield, 39% of the yield in those wheelings. So it was showing some quite sort of stark differences there. So if I sort of look briefly with you at why that could be, you know, what are the drivers behind that? You're all aware as an audience, I'm sure, of weight and pressure on our soils is the thing, particularly the pressure that squeezes those pores closer together and reduces the porosity in the soil, reduces the capability for roots to get through easy and to hold on to moisture. You have got less storage capacity, clearly. So pressure and weight are linked, as you'd be aware, particularly with any form of vehicle. The heavier the weight is, often the higher the pressure it exerts, although you can do something about that with tyres, and this is where we come to the context of Scott's prime mover tractor in due course. But in this case, I think it's always worth looking at both pressure and weight separately. So if we start with the top picture, the top graph, I apologise for it being a graph, but if you can bear with me, I can explain it a little bit. What we've got here is a harvester here, sugar beet harvester, with quite a high axle load on this middle axle under the bunker. It's nearly 18 tons, about 17.6 tons on that axle, and that was how it was assessed. And they assessed it trafficking the soil at 3 different pressures in the tyres. At the same weight. So basically what we're doing is altering pressure, keeping weight constant, quite high weight here clearly. And we had 3 pressures, 2.5, 1.5 and 1 bar, or in old money, 36, 22 and 14.5 pound per square inch. Couldn't go much lower than that. with a tyre spec on that particular harvester. And they measured the stress in the soil at various depths of transducers. Stress, in fairness, means nothing to me as a number really. So instead of the number, I've put you some dotted lines representing root growth here. They measured stress at various depths down to nearly 1 metre deep, not quite, about 0.8 of a metre, so to quite reasonable depths. And if you take a stress up to nominally about 100 kPa, and this does depend on how wet the soil is and how loose it is when you're stressing it clearly, but all things being equal, a stress of about the 100 kPa and a little bit more in this green zone here really isn't going to do a lot of damage to the soil in terms of what the root is capable of growing through of most crops you're growing. If you get to the yellow zone, we start to get a bit more of an issue with certain crops, those that be vulnerable to compaction, or seed rate, very small seedlings of sort of brassica crops, something like that, sugar beet, whatever, potatoes as well. They would struggle when we start to get to about this level at the yellow, and most crops would have a real problem getting through soil that had been stressed to this sort of level up here, about the 220, 240 kPa. Most roots won't get through soil that's been stressed that high. So if you sort of now look in terms of near the surface, there are big differences where we start from. When we get down to the 1 bar, we're nearly into the yellow zone for a start. As we go through to depth, there isn't much difference. By the time we get to 0.7 of a metre, for example, there's really no significant difference between any of those starting points. But near the surface, we've got big differences. So it's sort of telling us if we could get our target pressure applied to the soil down to less than 1 bar, single figure pounds per square inch would be a nice thought, then the sort of pressure we're applying to the soil is going to basically be coped with by a root of a growing crop, and by and large it's going to take that problem out without you having to do anything much to it, which has got to be of interest, I would suggest. And if you were to look at that in terms of a track as against an inflated tyre, it doesn't really matter on the colour of the tractor. Here's a green one, here's a yellow one. If you measure the stress at about 7 to 8 centimetres below those idlers there, provided this track is flat on the deck, and that is a key proviso, we're measuring about 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 of a bar. So provided the track is level and flat, you're going to get roughly around this level of applied pressure. If it's all on the back sprocket, you could probably multiply that figure by at least 10 or 15, because it's on a rigid steel wheel on a thin lump of very tough rubber, all on one sprocket. It starts to perform completely differently, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. So that's one way of looking at it. If you look at it another way, and you keep the pressure on this lower graph here, we're keeping the pressure the same on each of these tyres, and we're increasing the weight. And as you know, if you want to carry more weight at the same pressure, you've got to have a bigger tyre, you've got to have more volume. So this is a larger volume tyre at the same pressure as this one. This one's carrying more weight. So we're applying the same sort of squeezing action, the same stress to the soil, but as you can see, as we increase the weight, it pushes that problem deeper. But the scale of the problem, the quantum of it, the severity of it, is down to the pressure. So if you have a choice between weight and pressure, let's say you've got two tractors, one's larger than the other, the larger tractor's got much better tyres on, you can drop them to a lower pressure, but it's heavier. If soil is vulnerable, I would suggest you do consider the heavier tractor at very low pressure, because ultimately you're going to do less damage, of a quantifiable damage that can be really limiting to roots. And these days, as I'm sure you all know, you can change pressure, and you've probably got to change pressure from road to transport. That can be a big issue. I appreciate it can take time. I'm thinking here, focus your mind on when your soil is most vulnerable. When it's loose or when it's wet, or both, is when it's most vulnerable. And particularly with an operation such as drilling, which is what I'm going to focus on with Scott's setup in due course. And remember as well that up to 75% of damage by trafficking can be with the first pass across the ground, i.e. the front axle don't forget the front axle in all of this. If you've got a counterweight on there because you've got a combination drill, got a fair weight on the front, that can be often the one that axle, when you wait the drills drop down, that can be the one that gives you some significant issues, that first pass over the ground. And just to put a few numbers to that, this is a pal of mine again in North Lincolnshire with variable pressure on this tractor, a weaving drill here, and we used the fact you've got variable pressure to alter the pressures as we were drilling, as we were going across the field. We had 3 in this case. I've now taken this further this season. We've gone down to less than 6 psi in actual fact. But when you look at those 3 pressures in the drilled crop, a drilled cereals crop here, you can see the low 1 bar in this case, 14. As we got up to the 20 psi, the porosity went right down and the root levels went down, much as I showed you before. As the crop came through, you can see visibly more of an effect on where the drill tractor's been at high pressure as against low, and what that translated to in yield was a loss of nearly 30% of yield under high pressure. And that really was driven by the amount of root that was in the soil. We measured the root mass down to about 15 centimeters underneath all of the trafficked areas, and we were getting significantly higher levels of root mass because we had more porosity. So again, that bit really sort of hopefully backs up what you saw for the first picture. So if we take, apologise for this, Scott, it's a bit ad lib with the tractor and drill, but hopefully it gives you some sort of a rough idea. With Scott's CNH 7260 running on Michelin Zeobib, the very flexible tyres, good, top-notch, top quality tyres. There's 710s on the back, 600s on the front, Horsch Pronto 4 drill. The way we can see where we can get to, if you like, in terms of how low we can drop those pressures safely and realistically for field use, remembering we're relatively slow in field as against maybe road transport, is to basically assess the axle load, and you want the maximum loading condition, in other words, on the back axle when the drill's raised in the air with a full hopper, and on the front axle when the drill's on the ground, with as much counterweight as you need to use, if any, on the tractor. Probably you weren't using much, I don't think, in this case. And if you determine those axle loads, get to the maximum, and then look at the pressure data of those particular tyres. I've just done the rear for now, just to keep it simple, and as a matter of saving a bit of time, you can see potentially at the 0.7 of a bar, if we were going to stick to 10k forward speed, then per tyre we can take nominally just over 4 tons. So you're looking at about 8.35 tons on the back axle at 10k. Clearly that comes down as we go higher in speed. So it sort of starts to make you try and, well, you can start to work out potentially what we could do with this kit. I have to say at this point, if you've got some tyres from one of the tyre manufacturers, Michelin, Trelleborg, Bridgestone, Mitas, those sort of group, they generally offer a free of charge service. They'll come onto farm if you use their tyres. They'll come onto your farm, and if you can spend a little bit of time and put the right bits of kit on your tractor, preferably with a full hopper, or they can make allowances for that. They'll put weigh cells on the axle, they'll check what those loads are, and then they can actually, with reference to their data, which is in more detail than I've given you here, they can give you some safe figures if you tell them the parameters you're prepared to drop down to. For example, what am I prepared to drill at? How much am I going down the road? Am I prepared to put the pressures up for road transport, etc., etc.? Have you got slopes? They take all of these parameters into account, and they can give you a schedule for the safe minimum pressures on that. And that's, for me, a sensible way of doing it, because you've got the tyre manufacturer's blessing then if you go down to those pressures. So you've got a little bit of comfort in that particular set of data. There is another cruder way you can do. I won't dwell on it, but there's a figure in all tyre data, tyre manufacturers' data, called the static laden radius, this R dash in Michelin's term, at 843 mil. That's the distance from the centre of the axle to ground level when it's fully laden, when it's got the maximum weight on. And if in Scott's case, if you found you, with a full drill lifted up, you were measuring a distance that was greater than 843 mil, let's say it was 880, 890, you could let pressure out of that tyre until it dropped down to that level in safe knowledge that you're not going to exceed the amount of flex that tyre has been given. Conversely, if you were measuring a distance that was less than that with a fully laden drill, you'd need to put pressure in until you achieve that. So there are various ways around this, but why is it important? Well, in Scott's case, with a 4-metre drill and 710 tyres on the back, you've a nominal pressuring effect of nearly 75 centimetres under a 710 by the time you allow for the bulb of pressure. So 1.5 metres in 4, you on average are trafficking upwards of 35% of your farm. I accept there are tram lines in that, but equally there are turning headlands to consider where you're going to be trafficking a little bit more. So it is a significant level. So I'm sure Scott's already done the maths on this. If you potentially have dropped 20 or so percent on 37% of your farm, and we can give you a chance to save even 5% of that, you're nearly dropping 2% to the bottom line. So it's got to be worth considering, I think. We can discuss that with Scott as we go forward. I think that's probably the best way. Now let's think a little bit now briefly about reduced tillage and how we can use nature and metal to help to structure soils. I'm a big believer in the fact that roots structure soil, and if you've got the little example here I've got is of a cover crop ahead of a spring cereal. Cover crop was established after an autumn harvest. This particular trial here, we established a cover into relatively compacted soil, it has to be said. That the soil wasn't in particularly good condition. It wasn't desperately bad, but it would be equivalent to harvest baling damage, straw trailing damage, stuff like that, harvest damage in a damper season. And we established a cover crop straight away. We did that in 3 ways. We established it straight into the soil. They were all done with the same drill. Established straight into the damaged soil generally. We also loosened before we established the cover crop. So we got a cover crop with loosening here down to 15 centimetres only. We didn't go any deeper than that. Here we loosened it and didn't establish a cover crop. And here we didn't use metal and we put the cover crop in. And following that through, I'll give you some detail in a minute, in a little bit more detail, but you can start to see some big differences both in the structure and also the effect on that crop as it was coming through its growing cycle. Without a cover crop, we had very much less aggregated soil. There were bigger clods, bigger lumps. There was more barriers to those roots. It wasn't particularly friable. It wasn't as easy to drill for the actual spring sown crop. With the cover crop and the metal, we had a good friable tilth. We had good capabilities for the crop's roots to get down. Where we didn't have a cover crop in, but we'd used the loosening, we hadn't got that overwinter structuring of the soil, if you like. We hadn't got that wetting and drying taking place a little bit. We hadn't got that root going into the soil to stabilize where we'd loosened it. And that started to slump back again, and we hadn't got the result there either. So we very much had got, with the two together, a synergy. We got a better result than with each on its own, which is probably of interest. It's something that it's made me look further at. The type of loosening we were using was a low disturbance loosening. We weren't after really boiling that soil up and losing some of the natural structure that's present. What we were trying to do basically was take the compacted layer and lift it and stretch it apart in graphical terms. In the real world, that's what it looks like. There's a tight layer here you can see below the surface. We've lifted it with enough lift height, we've stretched it, but we haven't boiled that to the surface. So we've retained surface structure, we've retained surface crumb, we've given the drill for the following crop a better chance. It's got more aggregates to drill into with less effort to make a seed bed potentially. But we've stretched that compacted soil apart and produced what you could call vertical columns which will help to support next operations. They've got cracks and fissures in them to allow water and roots through. The roots can then get in there and do their job. And we've got drainage. We haven't got a solid pan. So this type of loosening action, I guess you would probably relate to sward lifting. And if you were going to combine roots and metal, that can be an effective way of doing that type of operation. So let's just for a minute drag you out of your comfort zones and go to think about direct drilling then. I'm not an evangelical direct driller, I've probably already said that. 6% of you are direct drilling, so there are a greater percentage than that down south of the border. There's been a lot of work done on direct drilling since the 1970s. It was very much in vogue, particularly south of the border in those times. It was dropped in favour of more traditional tillage after the 70s for a number of reasons, not the least of which was residues management, lack of burning as much as anything else, or burning straw and then not being able to burn straw started to make people think again as to how we cope with residues. But by and large, I think if you're going to think about successfully direct drilling anywhere in the world, north or south of the border, north or south of the equator, it doesn't matter. I think if you've got, for a start, effective good drainage, and that might be because it's naturally freely draining soil, that's a good start to have that. Your soil can return to field capacity easier and quicker. You've got to have good rotations, a broad rotation. You've got to have, as much as possible, crops, roots growing in your soil, and you've got to be prepared to manage your residues very carefully, very effectively, because we're basically asking our drill to cope with those residues. And you've got in the green, you've got the 3 pillars of conservation agriculture there. If you've got all of these with ticks in their box, and you've got a soil structure that is in reasonable nick or good nick, and you've got good organic matter content, I believe you've got an enormous amount going for you to say you can certainly do a lot less. Whether you translate that to pure, complete direct drilling is another matter, but you've got the foundation upon which you can do an awful lot less to your soil. The soil type comes into it, in my opinion, hugely significantly here. If your soil is self or non-self structuring, what I'm meaning by that is it calcareous? Can it wet and dry and start to open itself up, or has it got a high, particularly sand, pure sand, non-humic sand, or has it got a high silt content? Then it starts to be more slumping prone, as I'm sure you're aware. You are relying now on everything about nature to put that soil right to be able to direct drill it, or you've got to help it along the way. And I think within there lies probably the answer to this. Magnesium content has got a little bit to do with it, in my opinion. Certain people wouldn't agree with that, but I think high mag soils are intrinsically, you've got a shorter window of opportunity to them, and that can be an issue. And in the late 70s, the south of the border ADAS was then funded by public money, and the experimental husbandry farms that were run south of the border, and a number of farms that then were involved alongside that. They did a big survey of looking at the feasibility for repeated continuous direct drilling of crops, one after the other. How feasible was it? And it was based on a big survey of farms and an experience of those farms over a number of seasons. And they produced this map you can see here, coloured in 3 colours. The green colour represents soils, or it represents areas in the country where you are likely to expect a similar yield if you direct drill as compared to if you conventionally cultivate for most crops as an ongoing basis, a continuous basis. The white areas, by the way, weren't surveyed. If you go to the orange colour, then you would expect a similar yield for autumn sown and a reduction in yield for spring sown crops that had been direct drilled compared to conventionally cultivated. A lot of that was down to the soil type, a lot of it was down to the window of opportunity in the season. And if you went to the red area, you would expect a reduction in yield for both autumn and spring sown crops. And that was the nature of that survey. And there's some quite interesting green colours north of the border. I'm sure you probably want to discuss that later. And that map there, if you relate it to climate, the further north you go, the wetter it gets, in England anyways, the darker the colours get. If you now overlay a soil map of England and the UK on top of that, it tells you exactly what you can understand and want to know. These greener areas have got more of the required nature of those soils. And other things have changed, haven't they, since the 70s? We've got more experience of managing reduced till, let's call it that, as well as direct drilling. Technology has certainly changed. Ag chems have changed in a significant style. Economics have changed of the exercise, and remember that here they studied that on the basis of yield. They didn't go to gross margin, so they didn't apply any of the cost savings that you might achieve by reduced tillage or direct drilling, the sort of things that Scott's trying to get to with his reduced till strategy. They didn't apply this economically. They just looked at yield in those times. So I mean, there's food for thought there, and we've had much more experience now, and we're getting even more on the benefits, the pros and cons of how to manage cover crops. The thing that hasn't changed are the soil types. So there's always going to be drivers around soil type here. Now, I'll leave that for you to think about. We can discuss that later. Just thinking about how you can work with weather and tillage. And I appreciate that your weather windows north of the border are probably a lot tighter than ours down here, although it's probably not quite as different as it used to be sometimes. In a dry year, a lot of soils will crack and shrink. When they swell back up again, that action over a period of time can really structure a lot of soils. It may be you can work with that to enhance it as those soils swell up. A bit of shallow tillage on top can start to produce spaces in there that can hold those cracks slightly apart and can make them slightly more permanent when those soils swell back up. So you can start to use tillage to your benefit. In a wetter year, if you've got a cover or a catch crop or whatever growing ahead of a spring crop, it's potentially possible that you could use the moisture removing capabilities of that, depending on the time of the year, and this isn't always going to happen, but you could certainly potentially use that to do some structuring for you, probably to remove some moisture. And I've had some quite good success using a loosening action through a growing cover crop, and I was going to just briefly dwell on that. I'm not saying this is always going to work. I'm not saying potentially it could work in any of your cases, but if you've got roots growing and you've got a cover crop established, potentially I would feel if you're going to loosen the soil, then loosen it before you put the cover in, if there's time, if there's the opportunity. But if there isn't, or it forces you to delay establishing that cover to any significant extent, get the cover in, because we all know that the best time for these crops to grow is straight after harvest. You know, you start to lose a lot of day degrees as you move after harvest. So there are aspects there. Get the cover in, potentially using in this case a sward lifting type action. You can actually loosen through that growing cover crop in certain scenarios as a possible tool in the armory, let's call it that. And this was an example of a spring series, a spring barley that was established after a cover that had been put in after a winter cereals crop, winter wheat crop. Harvested, baled, established cover, and the cover itself in this field performed pretty well. It was growing nicely, apart from the turning headlands. They looked pretty much of a disaster. The cover looked sick. It wasn't getting through the soil. We dug down, and it wasn't giving value for money. So we thought, well, we've nothing to lose in this case. We'll get a sward lifter and loosen through that crop as it's growing. And we did just that. Very subtle stretch. Didn't go too deep. Didn't go to the full depth of the problem, and it released the roots of that cover to grow down. But we left a little bit unloosened so we could assess the results. And the picture here is of the barley, the spring barley established root growth here. This is the area where we'd loosened through that growing cover, and here's the area on the right hand side here where we didn't loosen through that growing cover. And you can see that the barley roots have mimicked what the what the cover roots did. They haven't got through here either very effectively. And the difference in yield was just over a tonne a hectare between that and that. So you know what a malting premium spring barley as this made was. His cost of doing that one operation was about £37 a hectare. So pretty good payback in one fell swoop there. I'm not saying it'll always work, but you know, if you can achieve those sort of results as part of a targeted approach and a managed approach, we didn't need to do the rest of the field, and the cover told us really where the problem was. So we used that as almost like a litmus test, dug down, confirmed it, and then tried to give it help, tried to give it some assistance. So that really was all I was really going to give you some flavors for now, because I think it's as well we discussed this. I think personally, if we're going to structure soil these days, rather than as a traditional real aggressive loosening action, if we can just do enough to subtly lift it and stretch it, you can achieve a lot more. You can leave stability and resilience in the soil. You can drive over that and it's not going to push really compact back down again. If you've got roots in there now growing, or you're going to establish roots in there quickly to grow, they're going to stabilize that for you and increase that soil's resilience. And the final point to make, the bottom right hand picture here, this was loosened with a sward lifting type, this type of action, and we left the sward lifter legs at 50 centimeter centers. But we got tiny little subtle wings. We were only going at about 15 centimeters deep, 6 inches in old money, and at 50 centimeters apart, arguably that's not enough tines in there to do a full loosening operation. But in this field, because we've got a lot of root mass and root ball in there, it increased the cohesive properties of that soil with the roots to such an extent that we stretched it between those legs even to the full width between the legs, effectively enough. So it's hopefully food for thought. Combining roots and metal can actually make both work a lot better. So that was as far as I was going to go with this at this stage. It gives us, quarter of an hour at least for discussions, one would hope. Does it make some sort of sense, does that?
Yeah, I think it's created a lot of questions, Philip. That's a good thorough talk, and you've maybe stretched us all as regards making what we think. So yeah, audience, please do fire in any questions that you have for Philip, or you want to ask Scott any other questions, and that. I suppose if I can use chairman's privilege and start as regards the cover crops that you've been using, any specific varieties or types of species?
Is this to me, Ewan?
Yes, Philip.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. No, I must admit I very much work with a farmer's choice, and we're finding for us south of the border particularly, they're very region and soil related. Some covers will work well for some people, others will work well for others, and you've really got to try it out. I've got some of my clients that really get on well with a clover as part of the cover mix. Others have tipped tons of clover on the field and got no result whatsoever. I think you need I think you've got to decide what you want to do to the soil. So if you want to basically put root fibers in there to give it some resilience and structure, you want a vigorous rooting, fibrous rooting crop as part of it. If you've got a structure, a potential structure issue, you want some fairly strong roots to go with that. It may be you want to assimilate a little bit of nutrient with it as well. You might want to graze them off. There's a lot of factors here where I've seen a mixture of oat, vetch or oat Phacelia. Their oat and black oat and vetch or Phacelia particularly is quite a decent mixture from a structuring point of view. I think you've got to be careful when you spray those crops off, when you destroy them, because they don't want to be the canopy management is crucial, absolutely crucial. You can leave them for too long and then give yourself a big problem with drilling if you're trying to do it with minimum disturbance, if you're not proposing to mix them in particularly much. You do need to destroy those residues, particularly the ones that will give off phytotoxins as they're breaking down and potentially affect your next crop. That's the last thing you want. I think you've got to be destroying them sooner than that, or doing something else like we discussed earlier on, grazing them, topping them, or doing something like that.
Yep.
I don't know what you think about that, Scott, really. It would be good to have your context on that, I think.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, Philip, do you agree with our system, what we're doing with the green manure? You know, we're mulching it and then we're ploughing it down, leaving it a couple of weeks, and then going on drilling. I mean, do you agree with that, or would you like to see us trying to direct drill into that cover crop?
It's a riskier strategy to direct drill with the weather patterns that you get, and I think you've got to design into this, and that's why I'm sure you're doing it. You've got to design a bit of insurance into that. Potentially there would be opportunities, but I think to base the entire program on it would be a high risk. So for me, the answer to the question was the most important bit was the first bit. Do I agree with what you're doing? 100% yes, because you're developing resilience in your soils. You know, and that's going to give you the starting point to be able to do less. And I would take the opportunity when it's there. It won't always be there, so you've got to have flexibility built in, which again you've got. So I like the choice of kit. I think it's very flexible because it allows you to do more cultivations. It allows you to do less cultivations and be effective. I think the choice of kit is very much driven by that flexibility. To have an out and out pure direct drill on the farm clearly wouldn't stack up monetarily anyway, but you can use what you've got to do relatively little if you want, can't you? If the conditions are right, if the circumstances are right. I think to be able to manage according to field by field, most people that are successful min tillers or reduced tillers study field by field and part field by part field in the end. And maybe the bit of time saving that you might get through doing less but targeted operations, you're going to use that time up by studying your fields and making judgment calls, but it's probably better fun doing that actually.
Yeah, and with the Toronto cultivator, Philip, say we're going in to establish a crop of wheat in oilseed rape stubble, what sort of depth should we be at with the cultivator if it's not a ploughed pan? How shallow can we go?
I would take a judgment call on the field, and if I was on your shoulder at that point, I would be prodding you to say, do you need to go that deep?
Yeah.
I go as shallow as husbandry, proper husbandry and proper establishment would give you. We don't want to be compromising here, but if you can save depth, there's huge savings to be made in fuel. The massive savings in fuel, but probably the more as important as that, if you've got a good structure, and the key to it, as you said, was if you haven't got compaction, if you've got a good visibly porous structure with nice lot of root fibers through it, then metal through that really isn't doing it any good. If the next roots will follow the last ones if your structure's in good order, if you've got decent porosity, and your organic matter, to come back to your point you made, your organic matter levels are such that you've got huge reservoirs of moisture in that. I'd go with you on moisture availability is double in terms of the 16% odd OM. So yeah, that's splendid. You've got potential for a bit of residual nutrient there, haven't you? If you need it, a little bit of mineralized nutrient will come. But yeah, all of those are suggesting that you've got good resilient soil. So I think the choice for your Toronto is down to, are you happy husbandry, are you happy slugs and everything else control? Are you happy for the next crop in terms of tilth? I'm sure you would be. I can't imagine you wouldn't be.
Yeah, no, there's always plenty of tilth with it, Anna. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, less would be more. If you, it's often good to vary depth. If you're into a system that is relatively similar one year onto the next, and you're not maybe ploughing as much, to repeatedly shallow till at one depth can risk creating a plane of weakness at that level, because you've naturally got a shear plane at that level. And if you get heavy rainfall, even with your resilient soil and good binders in it, you still get fines washed down through, and that they'll naturally sediment out at that layer you've created at whatever depth it is. If you can vary that, then you're not giving those sediments a chance to pick up and almost like block the filter. So I would, if there's an opportunity to do less, then use it. But then maybe next time, if you're going to do a similar process, maybe increase the depth a little bit, or vice versa.
Yeah.
If you're not moving the entire profile across the entire width, I don't believe that matters. I think it's actually quite good, provided you've got your tilth, provided you've got good husbandry with your residues. That's the crucial thing. It's probably the biggest challenge as well. The shallower you come, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
We've got a question here, Philip. Well, a couple of questions, I suppose. One is, we plough and then paddle roll before we drill. Presumably, we shouldn't. Could you comment on sward lifting or subsoiling to compensate?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. I can understand. I think the paddle roll's a good tool for you guys, because you can level, you can consolidate and firm it so that you've got some drive to drive through the drill or drive the drill, depending on what sort it is. So I can understand the need to consolidate. I can understand the need potentially to level. Yeah, if you were thinking of loosening, or you had a potential issue at plough depth, I would always, if I could, I would work after the plough with the loosener, and then use the roller on the back of the loosener if it's a packing type roller, a press type roller, to leave you a corrugated half to 3/4 of the way to a seedbed finish after the loosening operation. The loosening operation won't really be high draft at that point, because you're only just going below the depth of the plough. So it isn't particularly onerous, I wouldn't have thought. But that is quite successful, provided the moisture levels are right. I mean, that will tell you whether you can do it or not. There might be seasons when, if it hazes off, then about the only thing you can get on with is more of a paddle rolling action, if you need to firm it up. If it's maybe you've got some natural consolidation there as well. But yeah, I can see the reason for using one. But if there's a possibility that you regularly plough at one depth, and you've got a year where you've got a bit of an issue at that depth, and it's dry enough for traction on top, and it's effective not to make a mess with a loosener, it won't take much pulling through that, and you can use that with a bit of haze off. You can use that roller to really give you 3/4 of the way. Well, with your drill, Scott, after that you'd be drilling it, I would suggest.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay. And with another wee question, I think more about the organic matters that were going on, as regards looking at different types of manure. If you were got different cover crops and such, trying to improve the organic matter, is there any difference between different types of manure from different animals?
That's a really good question. I am going to be upfront and say I'm not the world's expert on that. The only thing I can say with absolute surety and confidence is, when I go onto a farm that's putting FYM back, I'm already, even before I arrive, I know what I'm going to see is going to be soil that's a bit more resilient. than a farm that hasn't put FYM back, particularly if they've taken the straw off. That's never let me down yet. You know, the FYM will boost your soil biology, it'll boost your earthworms, it'll boost your biological activity in terms of mycorrhizal fungi and stabilizers, everything it will do to good effect over a period of time. I don't think you can beat it, if I'm honest. A proper cattle manure, you know. I think if you go to more of a liquid based, maybe a little bit hotter product, then that has to be treated with a bit of care. But no, with absolute confidence, whenever I've been on a farm that's been putting FYM back, I know that the structure is going to be reasonable. I certainly know the resilience of those soils are going to be pretty good.
No, that's good. I suppose this is the saying goes, muck and magic. I suppose the muck's providing the magic for the soil.
Yeah. I mean, where I was today, not that it's relevant in terms of where I was, but he'd been putting muck back 1 year in 3. So it's all he had got scope to do. But those soils had withstood our really difficult spring where it was so wet and then zero moisture.
Yeah.
And you could see the crop was better sustained. I'm sure what you said, Scott, there about that OM level, you'd have more moisture, the crop will hang on for longer. And it's probably got better rooting too. It's probably got more pathways.
Okay, and another big question, Philip, for you. There's a lot of spring barley growers about to start the busiest time, and they're debating whether to chop straw or bale and take it off. Some people this year are trying to get rape in after spring barley, which is chopped straw can cause a problem for the next crop. But what's your value per hectare or per acre on chopped straw? You know, if taking in consideration a bit of compaction with trailers taking it off, and how much nitrogen do you need on your next crop to break that straw down? Because often if you're ploughing the next year, myself and farmers nearby are seeing it coming up again in the crop, the straw's not breaking down. So how could we get that chopped straw to break down?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think barley straw is probably one of the most challenging as well. A lot of guys down here will return all straw apart from barley straw because of the problems of good chop and spread, because of what it is really. You're right about the end lockup. Chaff's got a big effect on that. Chaff spread is hugely important as well, isn't it? You know, difficult to move chaff around once it's there. But that short-term lockup of N, whether that's applied N or mineralized N, is hugely significant. Early growth stages in many cases, yeah. I think if you move to a less intense system, then it very much puts the pressure on you to supplement those N levels in the surface, because that's where all your residues are, and that's where your early establishing crop is going to be most hit at the earliest stage, when probably those residues are at their greatest level of breakdown. It's the fence post analogy here as much as anything. They always rot off just on or below or at the surface. So you've got the most accelerated level of breakdown just at the zone where you're planting your seed. That's where the most amount of N is going to be locked up. So it's generally required that you're going to have to supplement that, particularly at that critical early growth stage. I appreciate there might be regulations lurking here. I don't believe anybody is doing this for the wrong reasons. You are purely supplementing what is locked up for the crop to have. It's not like you're slinging it on the ground, it's going to end up in watercourses. It certainly isn't. But if you plough it, if you plough residue down, there is a potential zone later on that's probably going to inhibit roots a little bit more. it's going to inhibit that next level of when that nutrient's required, slightly more than if it's on the surface. And if your biological activity is not as good, then that's really where that can be held up a bit. How can you improve straw breakdown at depth when it's ploughed down? The theory would tell me you've got to, if you can mix some soil in with it before you plough it down, mix some biology in with it before you plough it down, it's going to have more to start it off to break down as against a pure wad. But whether you can actually do that is another matter altogether. But certainly the rates of breakdown of straw, chaff, straw particularly, if it's well chopped and it's near the surface, there's going to be a lockup event there at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm conscious of time. There doesn't seem to be any more questions coming in at the minute, but this has hopefully been a good thought-provoking webinar for everyone that's still with us and listening and watching tonight. This modern technology allows folk to sit back and instead of watching the telly, just log on and sit in your sofa with your laptop and a beer in hand. And I hope it's been an enjoyable evening. I hope there's a few take-home messages for you as regards looking at from seeing the crops and the gross margin trials that Scott's been doing, as well as the crimper roller demo and lessons to be learned from that, as well as some of the take-home message that Philip's that's given us, whether it be tire pressures, cover crops, sward lifting. Any other take-home messages you want to get in the last bit, Philip?
I think pressure management really. When soils are vulnerable to damage, when it's wet or when it's loose, if you can save even 2 or 3 pounds per square inch, provided it's safe. It's got to be safe. You don't want to be ruining tyres, so that's where you've got to be careful. But if you, that will give you a benefit without doubt.
Yes. Oh, good. Good. Also, just as part of the farm advisory service, you will all be sent evaluation emails. If I can ask you all to complete them, due to the Scottish Government's funding, it's always good to get evaluations to know how successful this webinar was. And so originally I had intended, Philip, for you to come up to Aberdeenshire and be able to see Kirkton. It's unfortunate the COVID is kind of limited or that, but I suppose the benefit is you've not had to travel all the way north, and you can still sit in your own office and house, and you can switch off once we finish tonight. But can I say, on behalf of everyone who's listening, a big thank you to both Scott and to you, Philip, for all the effort that you put in to hopefully make this webinar a success tonight. So thank you from me, and if there's nothing else, we'll say good night.